Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to our talk. Today, the topic is people who love you want you to be safe. And here in the States, not everyone, but many people celebrate Thanksgiving. And so I had a lot of things on my mind leading up to kind of what I wanted to write about. And it is, for many of us, not all of us, clearly, it's a really painful, fraught time. And the results of the election and just what's happened here in the States over the last few weeks, I think a lot of people are still kind of processing what does it mean to live in a country where like one half of the voting public feels one way strongly and the other feels like completely a different way. And for me, I have been drawn toward story and narrative, just like those messages that are flowing through the waters that we are all swimming in. And really, I think trying to make sense of how we've arrived where we are. And I was also thinking about, the people who have really given me the most reassurance and the biggest roadmap of how I want to be in this world, how I want to show up for the people I love. And the first person who always comes to mind for me when I think about what safety felt like, or what unconditional love, what that feels like, is my grandmother. I was very fortunate in that my maternal grandmother, I called her Nanny, she was so loving, just really one of those people. I mean, her eyes were always dancing. She just loved me. And she passed away the week before I turned 4. So for me to have had such a, for her to have such a profound impact on my life and my understanding of what love looks like and feels like, that's pretty remarkable. But I did see her every day of my life until that last year when she got sick. She ended up having, she had breast cancer. It spread to her lungs. It went everywhere. By the time they figured out what was going on, it was too late. She had started with a cold and she just wasn't getting better. And a lot of other things happened, and I've written about it a lot and I've talked about it a lot, so I won't spend a lot of time on that today. But she, prior to that, she and my mom were best friends. My mom was 24 when she had me. And my grandmother was also basically a single mother twice. She had my uncle, my mother's brother, and her first husband died. And so then she was, with her son, and she met her second husband, and they were trying very hard to have a baby for long time. And the story goes, she went to my grandmother on my mother's side is Italian Catholic. My mother's side of the family is Italian Catholic, and on my dad's side of the family, his mother was Irish Catholic. But I don't want to get ahead of myself here. So my grandmother went to the priest and basically asked him to help. And she ended up having my mother. So my mom and dad, my grandmother and grandfather felt like the birth of my mother was an answer to their prayers. That's the way my mother always described it. And so when my mom had me, And then eventually my mother's father died. My grandfather died when my mom was 13. And so then it was my mom and my grandmother again. And my uncle, who was, older, he was out in the world. He ended up marrying my Aunt Louise, who I've talked about a lot as well. And so my Aunt Louise and my Uncle Richie were very much a part of, it was my mother's brother and his wife. And so she spent a lot of time with them. So my mother it's very interesting. And somebody sort of reflected that back in the comments under the essay this week. But, my mother was raised by people who were incredibly loving and affectionate and open and physically affectionate, and but she did not come out that way. She was not affectionate with me. She was more affectionate with my brother and my stepdad, but she was not affectionate with me. She's not demonstrative. And she was also not like verbally, she was not one to praise you. For whatever reason, it's kind of a mystery, right? When somebody comes out of a household where there's just so much love and affection extended, but then that's not kind of the way they turn out, it's interesting, right? And so my mom and dad, that was my mom's, she married my dad. She and my dad had an affair. My dad was married. He had 2 kids. He left his family. He married my mother, and she was around my grandmother until from the beginning. As soon as my mom had me, she was at the apartment every day. My mom and dad had an apartment in New York City. That's where I grew up. And my grandmother lived in Jersey City, and she would just come in every day and be with us, or we would go to her. So that's how those were my first few years. And we would go down to the Jersey Shore every summer, and my aunt and my uncle and their 4 kids, my cousins, would come as well. And then a lot of the time, the dads would leave. And so it would just be my mom and my grandma and my Aunt Louise and all the kids. And I was the baby. So my cousins are all 8, 10, 12 years older than I am. And so it was incredible, and I would spend the days on the beach with my cousins, with my Aunt Louise, with my mom, with my grandmother. My cousins the ice cream truck would pull up, and we'd all go running, and they'd get me ice cream, or we'd go to the amusement park, which was a couple blocks away. So it was beautiful. But my grandmother I would wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning when I was little. And when I was home, the rule was I could read or I could draw. I had to stay in bed. As long as I was quiet, it was okay for me to be awake. But at Nanny's, I was allowed to get up. And she, I think, also was an early riser. And so I would creep down the stairs at the house at the shore, and her bedroom was at the foot of the stairs, and it was like a little ritual. I would get up in the morning, and she had these little steps next to the bed, next to the twin bed that I would sleep in upstairs. I mean, I can see it all. And part of what I think is really another blessing in my life is I have a photographic memory. And so it's not that I retain every single thing. It's just the things that were really meaningful. I can still see this stuff, I can still see the, the bedspread in that room, and I mean, just all of it, the dresser and the curtains fluttering in the breeze, and just it's, I can still see that stuff. And so I used to quietly climb down the stairs, and I get to when you're little like that, the steps were uneven. It was an old house, and so I'd take the steps one at a time, right foot down, left foot next to it, right foot down, left foot next to it, holding onto the banister. And I'd get down maybe 3 steps, and she'd pop her head out of the door of her bedroom, and it was I might start crying. It was just you would have thought she hadn't seen me for months instead of just hours. She just so excited. She just looked at me like I was the most amazing, incredible little person in the whole universe, and she just was, I get to the bottom step, and she just wrap me up and we'd whisper, she'd teach me to be like really, really quiet so we wouldn't wake anyone up. And she'd put a jacket on, and she'd put her jacket on, and she had this blanket she would take for the beach. It's really thick. And we would walk over to the beach, but she would teach me, like, I remember her telling me, even as we were walking on the sidewalk to go to the beach and to the boardwalk, to keep whispering because sound carries on the wind and we don't want to wake up our neighbors. And I'm going to get back to that later, but she was always teaching me to be thoughtful, to think about other people. And I do think that that is a really important thing when you love someone, especially when you're talking about a child, right? To be teaching them to think about other people and to think about the impact that your actions are having on the people around you. And we would go to the beach, and she would just put that blanket down. And sometimes if it was really cold, I would just snuggle up with her, and we would talk, and we would watch the waves, and we would watch like seagulls overhead. And, we would eventually watch the sunrise. And it was like no one else was on the beach usually. It's just, just as far as you would look, it was just empty, beautiful beach. And she would tell me sometimes stories about my mom when she was little, which I was always fascinated. I think I never felt like I really had my mother, that I really had her attention, or I really had her love. And so I was longing for her and fascinated by her. And so she would tell me stories about that. She would tell me stories about her own life growing up. And it was a really precious, beautiful experience for me that left an indelible mark. And I heard from so many grandmas yesterday in the comments, which I was not expecting. And that really, that was so meaningful to me, because I think a lot of grandmas and grandpas too, I have no doubt, like probably worry, how much time do I have with this little person, and are they going to remember me? And totally crying. I think I just like really want to say like, yes, I think I can really reassure you that like, yes, they will remember you if you are giving them that kind of pure, unadulterated love. I think you can count on that. And I feel in my heart, like, I don't feel like I think of all the podcasts out there, I'm probably the one that like cries the most while I'm recording. Okay. I don't feel like she ever left me. Yeah, I feel like she's been in my heart. I've been carrying her in my heart my whole life. And it's such a blessing in my life. And she was such a blessing in my life. And what happened after she died is just like everything fell apart. For me anyway, and for my family of origin. Like my mom and dad split, and they'd been keeping up appearances for her. My mother didn't want her mother to be worrying about her or me and what was going to happen after she died. She was trying to, not have her under any additional stress. I remember the last day of my grandmother's life. I wrote about it in my memoir. It's like it's seared in my mind. And after that, it just did not. I think my mother did not. I think she felt ashamed and embarrassed that her marriage had fallen apart. I think a lot of people had already been. I know that my grandmother was very supportive of the marriage eventually. She wasn't happy at first because my dad was married to someone else and he had 2 children, and he left his family to be with my mother. And just Italian Catholic, right? My grandma, divorce is it's not good in the Catholic Church, it's not. And she was a practicing Catholic, my grandmother. So she was very concerned, I think. But I do think after a time, my dad, like, he'd be very charming. He's, fun and smart and charming, charismatic guy. And I think he knew how to, get in there. And it's not that he didn't have any good qualities. He did, but he was just not a person that you would want to be married to, dating. It's not a person you would want to have as your dad. But But I think he did win her over, and she was supportive of them. But I think my mother was very worried that her mom would be devastated and incredibly anxious if she knew that the marriage wasn't going to last. And so they kept that from her. So basically, my grandmother died, and then a week later, my dad left. And then, like, I think the day after my dad left, my mom and I drove to this farm where she had a friend I'd never met, and that friend of hers had a daughter a little bit older than I was, and my mom left me there because I think she needed to recover. Like, her mother had just died, which I know what that is now, the grief of that. And their relationship was so close. I think she was kind of done in. And then my dad left. And my mom, I think, was very in love with my dad. And I think he really, really broke her heart with his, infidelities and all of that. So, and I think she had a lot of rage also, a lot of rage. And unfortunately, I think somewhere subconsciously, or maybe not so subconsciously, like, she really felt like things went wrong between them when she got pregnant with me. And so I think on a subliminal level, or maybe more conscious, she really did blame me for the end of her marriage. And I don't think she wanted to blame me, but I think she did. And when she drank, that rage would come out. So it was painful, to say the least. And then I was in this cycle with her where I was constantly trying to get her approval, get her attention, get her to love me, So that, and other things fell apart. I started to see my aunt and uncle and my cousins not too long after my dad left. I think a few months went by, maybe more than a few months, and eventually I think she did need to lean on them, and she would go leave me for the weekends, which I loved. I was thrilled to be there. So that, my grandmother and my aunt and uncle and cousins, those are the people who really taught me what it feels like to be loved and cherished. And if I had not had them, I really don't know who I would be. I really don't. I think that was life-saving for me, and I think it gave me a roadmap of what it feels like and how you create that feeling for other people of being really loved and being safe with you, knowing that you are safe and you are protected, and you are, that you have people there that are going to, they will fight to the death for you if they have to, So that is part of what I was thinking about when I was thinking about all the things that I'm really grateful for this week. And sometimes you've got to, I'm not someone, and if you've been, reading my stuff or listening to the podcast or practicing with me, or do yoga with me, then I'm not one of these people that wants you to shoehorn everything into your gratitude folder. I'm really not. I'm not one of those people that's stay positive, stay positive. It's some things are really heartbreaking and devastating and enraging and disappointing. And, I feel you don't have to put everything in your gratitude column. You don't have to be thankful for every single thing that's ever happened to you. Betrayal, but I do think that the job eventually is to try to figure out, okay, what am I going to take away from that experience? What am I going to let that experience harden me or soften me? I think ultimately that's what it comes down to. And I have found over time that if, it's always going to be better for you if you can let these things soften you, break your heart open and not harden your heart. So that I was talking about, and I have been, as I said at the beginning, kind of drawn toward unraveling some of the messaging, the narratives, the stories that are flowing through the waters that we're swimming in. And I mean, I've gone back to Greek mythology and Danish folk tales and Grimm fairy tales and Bible stories that have permeated the culture, even for people who are not religious or even Christian, right? Just Adam and Eve, stories like that we're all familiar with. And I was also thinking about stories this week, and two stories. One of the other things that saved my life, along with my grandmother and my aunt and uncle and my cousins, were books. And my dad's third wife, my dad ended up having four wives. His third wife is the one that I spent the most time with. She moved in with us right after my dad left my mom. So, you know, and she was 23 at the time. I was 4. She was 5 years younger than my mother. My mother was already like incredibly less than half my dad's age. So he just kept going like lower. And I guess I'll just say as an aside, like that's not uncommon because, if you're going to like not be great to people, the younger you go, the less frame of reference a woman has and the more crap she'll put up with, So, but she was an avid reader. She was incredibly smart. She's an architect. Eventually the apartment they moved into was just like floor to ceiling bookshelves around 2 walls, and these were like high ceilings, and I mean it was just books, and she was always handing me a book to read, and sometimes they were not they were not age appropriate, but I didn't care. I just getting lost in someone else's story, I really think saved my life, because just things went really badly. My mom became an alcoholic, high functioning, but like an alcoholic, and she would become enraged and go after me a lot, emotionally, physically. It was not good. And my dad was a rampant womanizer, and he, turned me into like his tiny little pocket therapist, literally like tiny, like pull you out of a pocket therapist. And it's very convenient to have a therapist who thinks you hung the moon, right? Like a tiny little, oh, daddy, like it's these women, if only they would share you, it would all be okay. I had no idea. I was like 4, 5, 6. So that's what happened, and other things happened. It became like chaos and a lot of pain and a lot of rage and acrimonious, divorce situation. And, it was rough. So, but the books were, that really saved me, just to immerse myself in someone else's story. And I mean, I read the Colette series when I was like, I don't even know. I think I was like 9 or 10 or something. And The Color Purple and The Bluest Eye and all these books when I was super young. And they really sunk in. I think I was also just a very sensitive kid, but they really, I absorbed them. And I'm incredibly grateful because it did shape me, it did shape the person that I became. And I also like loved Mr. Rogers, and I like even now listen to his, and I'm like, oh, this guy's brilliant. No wonder I loved him. So there are certain people and books and authors that I was drawn to, and things that I really held on to that I think, got me through. And then there were stories that were confusing to me. And one of them that I wrote about this week was The Giving Tree, Shel Silverstein. And I loved Shel Silverstein as a kid. I had like, A Light in the Attic and Where the Sidewalk Ends, and The Missing Piece and the Big O, and just a lot of his books. But The Giving Tree, I really struggled with as a kid, and my dad used to love to read it to me, and I would always end up in tears. It's kind of strange. Like, I do think if I was reading a bedtime story to my kids when they were little and it made them cry, but like not in a good way, I probably would stop reading that book. I don't know. But you want to send your kids off to sleep feeling like happy and peaceful, and when they're little, certainly. So anyway, that's another story. But he would read that book to me, and I just would feel so heartbroken for the tree. And I feel like a lot of people are familiar with this story, and some people love it, to this day. There's a lot of controversy about the story. So it turns out, like, when I got older and I realized, oh, like, it's not just me. There's a lot of people who are really, like, having a tough time with this story. But a very brief synopsis is just, there's this gorgeous, vibrant, prolific apple tree, and there's a little boy, and the tree and the boy love each other, like a little love affair going on. And he, sits under the shade of her tree and reads and plays and climbs, and they just adore each other. He eats her apples when they're ripe and they fall from her branches, and he goes to see her every day. As he gets older, he's visiting less and less. He's got his own life going on. He's got his own, human grown-up interests, and he starts to only show up when he needs something. Essentially, I'm, giving the abridged version. So he will come at a certain point. He needs money, and she says, "Well, take my apples and go sell them at the market, and you'll make money, and then you can kind of get your start." And then he comes back, years later, and he wants to build a house, and she says, "Take my branches." So he cuts her branches off, and already then as a kid, I just remember like being devastated, and he builds himself a house, and then he comes back like years later and never says thank you. He never says thank you. Comes back and he takes most of her trunk because he wants to see the world, and he builds himself a boat. And, she says there's something at that point where she's like, she just doesn't feel so happy anymore. He's leaving, with all of her everything. It's all going. And then eventually he comes back, and she's just a stump, and she has nothing to offer him but somewhere to sit. And he's old and alone and miserable, and he's still not grateful. And he's still kind of like, he's disappointed she can't give him anything else. I mean, it's, I don't know. So I would get really upset. Like, why is the boy, so selfish? Like, he keeps coming and taking things, and he doesn't even say thank you, and he doesn't appreciate her. And why does a tree keep saying yes to that? And my dad would say, "Oh no, it's unconditional love, and the tree loves him, and she's happy to give him everything." Okay. And there are still people who will say it's an allegory about motherhood, like the mother-child relationship, and how your children just, your job is to just give and give, and, help them get, start their own lives. And for me, no. For me, it's like, if you are trying to raise good human beings, part of that is teaching them what is okay and how we treat people. And sometimes that means teaching them how to treat you. And if you've got kids who only show up when they need something, are not grateful, are not kind to you, never kind of ask if you're okay or how you're doing, never, especially if we're talking about grown kids, you know what? Like, you're not doing them any favors if you just keep giving and giving and giving to your own detriment, and then you're nothing but a stump. To me, that's not actually loving. Right? The idea at a certain point is to say, especially to a child that is like old enough to know better, "I'm sorry, no." Like, I love you. I would give you anything, but you're not treating me properly. And, yeah, I'm going to have some boundaries here. You're not only teaching your child at that point the right way to be in the world, you're also modeling for them the way that, hopefully they want to be in a relationship, which is, there's give and take here. And if you really love someone, I mean, listen, the other thing is, I am the kind, I would give my kids the shirt off my back and anything else, but not if they were being little jerks, then I would have to hit the pause button, be like, "Excuse me, wait a second, we're going to have a conversation now. Like, this is not it." Because I think that's part of my job. I'm not just trying to think about the relationship that I'm having with them. I'm also trying to think about what kind of human beings am I raising here to go out into the world? Am I teaching them, like my grandmother did, to whisper at 5 o'clock in the morning so you're not waking people up? To really think about the impact of your actions on the people around you. So the giving tree, if it was supposed to be an allegory about the parent-child relationship, I'm still not in. I'm definitely not in, because that to me feels, there's just like a real ungrateful unaware me message that is being strengthened there. At no time does the tree say to the boy, you know what, I really only see you when you need something. It would be really nice if you actually thought about me once in a while. And you can take my apples, but like I'm not gonna give you my branches and my trunk. I'll have nothing left. You're taking there's nothing left at that point, and you're not even appreciative, and I'm like barely seeing you. So there's a line here. Like, I'll help you, but I'm not gonna kill myself. So that, and then there's, and I'll circle back to that in a minute, but there's another an Aesop's fable, and I loved Aesop's fables as a kid too, and I read a lot of books to my kids, and again, I'll come back to that in a minute. But Aesop's fables, there's one where there's a wolf and a crane in the forest. Well, there's a wolf first, and he's like having a meal, and he gets a bone stuck in his throat, and so he is running in circles and coughing and trying to clear his throat and trying to get the bone out, and it's totally stuck in there. And a crane comes by, a crane who is described as kind-hearted, and the wolf explains to her, I have a bone stuck in my throat, can you please help me with your long slender beak? Can you help me dislodge this bone? I'm stuck here, and I'm in pain, I'm in agony, and I'll make it worth your while. So that always seemed really strange to me. What are you talking about? I'll make it worth your while. If the crane is kind-hearted, why wouldn't she just help him with no incentive? So she sticks her beak down his throat. She carefully dislodges the bone. The wolf says to her, "Oh, thank you so much. I can breathe again. I can, the pain is, thank you." And the crane is pleased, and she starts to go on her way, and then she pauses and says, "Well, wait, where's my reward?" Now, the wolf did say to her, "I'll make it worth your while." So, he introduced this kind of weird thing, but he's not happy that she says that to him. And he says, "What do you mean? The reward is you stuck your head in my mouth and I didn't eat you." I'm a wolf. That's your reward, and the crane goes on her way, but she is dissatisfied with the amount of gratitude the wolf expressed and aggravated by his snarkiness. And the moral of the story of this fable is, it's noble to do good deeds, but not everybody will appreciate them. So maybe save your good deeds for people who are going to express enough gratitude to please you. It's super weird. Because, if you're a kind-hearted person, then the reward is in doing the kind thing. The reward is it's built in. If you're in a restaurant and somebody starts choking and you run across the room and give someone the Heimlich maneuver, you don't then stand there and say, "Well, now can you give me some money?" The reward is you just save someone's life, right? That's more than enough. So it's all wrong. It's all weird. It's all sort of the wolf is this, I don't even know why he's introducing this, making it worth her while, or what that even means. It always seemed odd to me. And the crane walking away, just feeling kind of she didn't get the gratitude she would. Just none of it was, to me, I'm this is not a good fable about teaching gratitude and thankfulness, and this is just weird. So there's some weird stuff out there, and I sort of those two stories rose to the surface when I was thinking about the ways that we are taught to be thankful, or to think about gratitude, or to practice gratitude, or to express thankfulness. And both of those felt very problematic to me. And so I was then thinking about all these people who've been talking about, writing about, posting about how hard the holidays are going to be this year. especially the people who very much wanted the election to go a different way, to be with family members who voted kind of against their right to exist freely and openly. For example, I have a lot of queer friends who some of their family members that they're about to sit around a table with voted, for a ticket that is very much not supportive of the LGBTQ community at all and has made it clear. So it's very painful to go sit around a table with people who are going to say, I love you, but are also at the same time voting for people who are going to make you less safe in the world. And it's a gaslighting thing when you have people who have voted in this way, but don't want to own that part of it, And this is part of what I've been talking about for weeks, is like the messaging of this campaign was so relentlessly misogynistic, racist, bigoted. It just every day, that was like the messaging. And you really can't separate the messaging from the consequences. It's like, I know there are people who want to say, well, I don't like any of that. I voted because, I want the border closed, or I want cheaper groceries. Well, I mean, I don't know, because I don't know, but I don't think you're going to be happy about what is going to happen to a lot of your friends and neighbors with mass deportations if it goes the way they say it's going to go. And groceries are not going down. They may be going up significantly. And we've got healthcare issues and education. There are people like, good, wipe out the Department of Ed, like cut the fat. Well, I mean, okay, but then you better be putting people in and figuring out other systems that are going to make things okay for everyone. Like, you want to trim the fat, that's one thing, but you're going to put people in a position where if their kid has special needs, now there are no services for them. I don't think people are going to be happy about that. So there's a lot of people who voted for them are now realizing like, like the ACA and Obamacare are the same thing. Am I going to like lose my benefits now because I have a pre-existing condition? Am I going to be able to keep my child on my plan until they're 26, or is that going away? Like, am I going to be able to get like a 504 or an IEP for my kid who has special needs in elementary school, or those programs? There's just a lot of things going on here that I think are going to be really distressing for people, many of whom voted for this, and the tariffs and just all this stuff that's going on it's scary. And so you have people sitting around a table, and the repercussions for some of those people are like in their day-to-day lived experience. And within 24 hours of this election, you had this whole your body, my choice thing going on. And I actually saw a post of someone that I know, peripherally, like someone I know online. And she was like, does anyone know what that means? Your body, my choice. And she voted for this other ticket. And it's kind of like, what? Really? I mean, is it confusing what that means? It means you don't have bodily autonomy. I'm going to decide what you can do with your body. It's not hard to understand, And so, and when you have like the person who's about to be vice president talking about childless cat ladies ruining the country, and if people don't have children, then they don't have a vested interest in the future of the country. What about like 18-year-olds who've gone off to war to fight for this country? They didn't have kids, but they put their lives on the line. There's just a lot of really painful, no other way to interpret this messaging that has happened. And so if you voted for that, and then you have people sitting around the table that are having to like deal with the fact that you voted in a way that is going to create instant jeopardy for them, that they already instantly are going to be less safe in the world. And then you don't want to talk about how they feel because we're trying to have a holiday here, so just please pass the gravy. Or, I mean, sometimes it's some of the things that I have seen, where people are saying, oh, I'm going to make like ice cubes out of your lib tears. Like, there's zero compassion. There's no sort of like, like trying to cross the aisle or, there's none of that. There's none of that. It's just like doubling down and kind of really cruelty, and a lack of compassion, and sort of like a celebration of that cruelty. And that is what this is not a that's what's happening, and it's happening at the top of the ticket. I don't know if you saw like the quote unquote happy Thanksgiving message from the guy who's about to be president again, but it wasn't pretty. So it's like, there's nothing inclusive or loving or like, hey, let's come together. None of that's happening from the very top of this ticket at all. In fact, the opposite's happening. And so, yeah, people are going to really be having a hard time, just like passing the salt and acting like everything's okay, because for them, it's not okay. They're scared right now. And that is why the title of my essay is People Who Love You Want You to Be Safe. Because I think part of what happens here is this, and gaslighting has been used so much that it's like, I hate to even use the word, but that, hypocrisy and like unwillingness to own it, right? Like if you voted for it, then you voted for a ticket that was openly misogynistic, racist, and bigoted. You did. And it, to me, like there's no reason, there's nothing that outweighs putting your neighbors at risk. Whatever benefit you think you were voting for, if you were willing to overlook what was going to happen to your neighbors, for me personally, like that's just like a hard full stop, we don't have to agree, and I know that we don't all agree, but like for me, yeah, I cannot vote for someone who is going to put my neighbors in jeopardy. Now, I know there are people who were like, this administration and like what's been happening in Gaza, and like, listen, I said this last week and I'll say it again, I've never been someone, I don't want my tax dollars spent killing other people around the globe. Like that's never been, I've never wanted that. I'm paying into a system that is, by my way of thinking, deeply flawed. I know the world is violent. I'm not naive. I have been studying world history for as long as I, could understand that kind of thing. I've been fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by human nature. And so to acknowledge that, to understand that part of what has gone wrong here from the beginning is just this idea of like taking a club and banging somebody over the head if you see something you want because you want it, right? And hopefully the idea is that like as we evolve, we are learning and growing and developing reason and empathy and doing that thing of whispering on the way to the beach so we're not waking up our neighbors, right? Or thinking about your footprint. And there have always been these people too, I think from the beginning of time, thinking about, am I taking more than I need? Am I, what is the impact of my behavior on my neighbors, the people around me? How can I help? What can I do? There have always been those people. And I'll go back to Mr. Rogers for a minute. It's like, I remember him saying that when he was a little boy and he would get scared, his mother would tell him, when something scary happens in the world, look for the helpers. You're always going to see helpers. And that is reassuring. That is the thing that gives you hope that, when you're despairing, that like reassures you that there are people who care. And right now, there are a lot of us who are like, we're looking for those people. We're looking for those people who are despairing because those are the people who have a similar outlook about how we try to address the serious issues in our world, like what is needed. And certainly by my way of thinking, the last thing that we need or want are people who are white nationalists taking over. Like that to me is never going to be a good thing. Or people who believe there's only one way to pray, one way to love. That's not it. I mean, this is a big world, it's a big wide world, and everything that has created the most division amongst us is man-made, right? And even that, the fact that I just said man-made, person-made, right? It's like, all of it, like all this, the borders and the different languages and the different religions and the different, like all these things that we've named and claimed and, said this is how things are. That's what has created that us versus them thing. And then there's been the other sort of narratives that we are immersed in, like Darwinism, right? Darwin, survival of the fittest. And I talked about that a couple of weeks ago too. If you actually read Darwin, right? It's like he's talking about the most adaptable will survive, not the strongest, but that got lost along the way. And so when you have a culture and the messaging from the time you're tiny is, you got to look out for number one. And if you want to be happy, it's all about like how you look and what you have. Then you're going to raise a culture of people who are like survival of the fittest, looking out for number one and trying to accrue, and fill the void with things or with like external stuff, right? A lot of money or a big house or a fast car or like weighing a certain amount or like, bigger boobs, bigger biceps, smaller waist, a lot of hair on your head, not a lot of hair anywhere else. Like all the stuff. And also so much in our culture. And certainly I can talk about like my family of origin and the households that I grew up in, the gender stuff. I was very much taught little girls are supposed to be kind, quiet, listening, helpful, happy, calm. Yeah. Smart was fine, but like don't show off. Like it was very prescribed behavior. And little boys were encouraged to be loud and like, strong and tough and don't cry, don't express any, vulnerability. And I think a lot of the kids growing up in like the Gen X, I'm Gen X, like in that, generation were taught that, very strict, sort of like the girls' aisle is pink and sparkly and full of like baby dolls and unicorns and fairy dust, and the boys' section is full of like trucks and footballs and guns, and you go down that aisle and you go down this aisle and never the twain shall meet, basically. And I think it caused a lot of damage for a lot of us because what do you do then as a little girl if you feel angry? Where do you put that? For me, that was not acceptable. I was not allowed to express anger, and I wasn't even really allowed to express sadness. And what I mean by that is like, if I did, it was made very clear to me, this is not welcome. These feelings that you're having are not welcome. There's no space will be made for this. No attempt to understand what's happening with you. That's not going to occur. My mom at a certain point, she said to me, you were born with a certain melancholia about you. Well, no, I wasn't. I wasn't. It's like I can look back and like the home movies and the pictures with, again, like my grandmother and my aunt and my uncle and my cousins, and I was a happy, loving, trusting, curious, optimistic kid. And then a whole bunch of stuff, how the bottom kind of fell out. Everyone in my life disappeared for I mean, I think about a month, just everyone. My grandmother died, and then I was at this farm, and I didn't have any way to reach anybody. I was just with this strange woman and her daughter. I mean, she was a nice woman, but like I didn't know, she's strange to me. And I had no way to reach anyone. I didn't know if I'd ever see anyone again that I knew. And when my mom eventually came and got me, I don't know how long for sure I was there, because she was not the kind of person who would have those conversations. If I said to her, Mom, you know that farm, like who was that? Like how long was I there? Or like what, like how come I didn't go to like Aunt Louise and Uncle Rick? Like what happened there? She would become enraged instantly. It was like I was criticizing her. I was blaming her, for troubles like abandonment issues or whatever. Like that was not acceptable. She was not going to have those conversations. And I got labeled as sensitive, and I was a sensitive kid. I certainly was, but sensitive doesn't mean wrong. It doesn't mean you're seeing things incorrectly. It just means that the things that you're seeing, they affect you deeply. They have a real impact on you. And so I got labeled as being sensitive and overly dramatic. And my my mother and like all of their close friends called me Sarah Bernhardt, as dramatic. And it really messes with your head. You're like, okay, wait, I see my mom is drinking to the point where she can't stand up without help. She's slurring. Sometimes she is scary, like she's coming after me. She's saying things to me. She's doing things like this can't be right. And you're trying to get help. You're saying to the other adults who know her and love her and know what is happening, like, I don't think this is okay. I don't think she's okay. And you're being told your mother is fine. She's a social drinker. You're dramatic. It does a number on your head. You just start to think, maybe is it me? Am I like not perceiving reality correctly? And so that when I came out of those two households, and my dad's was just a whole other circus of, insanity and like being told the giving tree, like you just give and give and give and give, and you don't question. And for my dad, he took and took and took and took from every woman in his life till she was nothing but a stump, and then he was kind of teaching me. And I think maybe on some intuitive level, even as a little kid, I realized if I don't do something, this man will take everything. Like I'll have nothing. Like I think I knew that, his need for adoration and approval and, was so deep and so great. And that is all he wanted. And if you ever said, hey, you know what, actually, this thing that you're doing, like, why are we going to see some other woman before we come home to see my stepmom who has dinner on the table and like clearly loves you? And why do we have to keep secrets? And, if a woman answers the phone, he would never want me to say, who's calling, please, and then say, Dad, Barbara's on the phone. Like I wasn't supposed to do that. I was just supposed to say, Dad, you have a phone call. Even then, my stepmom would go right into the bathroom and sob all night. So there's a lot of stuff that was going on that, was pretty easy to identify as like not okay. But if I actually said that, I was shot down, in a profound, serious, painful way. So you learn to like keep that stuff in. Well, I think a lot, it's extreme, but I was very much taught my role, what I was allowed to do, what I was supposed to do, what earned like approval and love and what did not. And with my mom, it was sort of like she would banish me from the kingdom kind of a thing. If I did anything to displease her, love was withdrawn, and it was brutal. And with my dad, when I got to be 13, I didn't want to be listening to his, I didn't want him crying in my arms anymore about all these women and his need to be free, and he couldn't commit, and if only, they would share him, everything would be fine. That's what I grew up hearing, and I believed him for such a long time because I did. When I was little, I thought he like hung the moon, as you tend to do, right? When you're a little kid like that. And that's why I was the apple of his eye, because I thought he was amazing. And as soon as I didn't, as soon as I questioned that, he didn't know how to talk to me at all. He stopped talking to me about women and everything else. He didn't know how to be a dad. He knew how to take. he knew how to, um, he knew how to take, and if you would give, then you would get, you're such an old soul, and you're so special, and you're really, like, you're extraordinary. But the minute you're like, Dad, you're hurting everyone. You're breaking everyone's hearts here. Mom, my stepmom now, like your first wife, what are you doing? Mm-mm. Now we're not going to talk, and there was never any like, this idea of like my dad being my protector, keeping me safe in the world. He's the last person to keep me safe. He's probably the first person to make me not safe. So, all that messaging and all that story stuff is what I've been really interested in, I think, since the election, because I'm trying to make sense of how, it does feel like half the voting public is looking at reality and drawing one conclusion, and the other half is looking at the same reality and drawing a completely flipped, idea of what's happening and what will help. And so it's one of those things where you're like, what is going on here? Like, how have we arrived here? And how can we like start to unravel this stuff, at least bring it out into the light and talk about it? And I think that, going back to the microcosm, macrocosm thing, like if you really do boil it down to human nature, people who are taught that anything different is scary, those are people who are in fear. If you see someone loving differently than you do, and that feels threatening to you, that's such a good moment to try to figure out why. Like, what are you worried about? I mean, is it that you are really worried that this person is going to go to hell because that's what the Bible told you, that it's sinful, like homosexuality is sinful, and so you're worried about that person's soul, and you think it's your job to save their soul? Is that really what's going on? Because I don't think it is. I think that the minute you're looking at somebody else's different choice and feeling threatened, it's your own fear. It's your own, your own like fear about what's happening here and the choices you're making, and if you're living your life, the right way. Because no one knows, okay? Like, let's just say this, or I'm going to say it. You can think whatever you want. My belief is that we're really not going to know what happens after this until we exhale for the final time. And then we'll know. Until then, we're guessing. And historically, a lot of religion, a lot of these things that have been written down, if you look in the historical context, it's a way to control people so that there's some order, so that people are not, and some of this stuff, like, hey, listen, at the heart of most religions and most spiritual practices, not all, but most, right? It's going to be like the same stuff. Like, don't kill anyone, don't don't be envious. Don't try to take your neighbor's wife or belongings. Like, don't kill, don't covet, don't steal. It's just basic stuff of like, be a decent human being, whisper on your way to the beach. That's all it is, really. And so, but when you start getting into these stories where it's like, well, women are the threat, they grab that apple because they can't resist temptation and they put us all in jeopardy. When that's the messaging, you're going to get a bunch of people who rise up and want to control women. Your body, my choice. It's not confusing what that messaging is. It's, I get to decide what happens to you in your body. When you look at like the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, all this stuff, like, so even a country, macrocosm, right? Like, to me, and I've been saying this for a long time, the Declaration of Independence is kind of like America's Tinder profile. It's like, this is who we're going to say we are. Sending our ambassador in, like, we're great. all men are created equal. Okay, well, first of all, you said men. And secondly, what you really meant is white men, because like, know your history, right? The founding fathers were not talking about black men, and they weren't talking about women. So people that say, well, they just meant men like humanity. No, they did not. No, they did not. Like, just take a look. What do you think? I mean, the Three-Fifths Compromise and Jim Crow and like segregate, like all this stuff. They were not talking about all men being created equally. They were talking about all white men being created equally. So you can't understand yourself if you won't look at your own history and the messages you might have absorbed as a child growing up in an environment. That's what we do. We're like little sponges. And you can't really understand your country if you're not willing to look historically at what has happened. And you can't understand the dynamics in your family if you're not willing to look at how your own actions are going to impact the people you purport to love. So, I think for me, part of the reason I've been digging into so many of these like stories that a lot of us have heard growing up is because I think that some of the stuff we've been taught is not great. Certainly, like any ideology that's teaching you women can't be trusted, that's like, please, could we be done with that already? It's 2024, but we're going backward, which is terrifying. There isn't anything confusing if someone is saying your body, my choice, to have a woman be like, does anyone understand what this means? Come on now, honey. You know exactly what that means. You're not confused. Don't pretend to be confused. Like, let's be real. If you voted for this, at the very least, own it, right? At the very least, be like, you know what? Yes, it's more important to me, whatever, to worry about my own family. I don't care about what's going to happen to anyone else. I don't care about things that are not going to affect me directly. Or I think I know what's best. You may have wildly different feelings, but and maybe your right to exist is threatened, but I still feel like I know what's best and I'm going to do it. At least like own it so we can then have some conversations about where we are. Or like, I don't know, examine the messaging a little bit, right? Deeper than just believing what people are saying when they've proven time and time again they're not trustworthy and they lie all the time. Like, at least go and investigate, is like, I hear people saying that like a D&C is an abortion, but it's also the same procedure you need if you're hemorrhaging from a miscarriage. Is that true? Let me try to find that out. Are the bans having an impact on women who are pregnant and having pregnancy-related emergencies, and not just women who are electing to have abortions? Let me just like see before I figure out how I want to vote on this. Because otherwise, if you just go ahead and vote and you're like, well, I didn't know that. Well, then don't vote. Like, figure it out first. I'm just seeing so many people who are like, oh, wait, so wait, I might lose my health insurance now, or like my kid who has diabetes, like I might not, that might be a pre-existing I mean, I'm sorry, like this is what people were screaming about for like months. So it's tough. And I think that it is unfair to expect people who are now feeling afraid for their like right just to exist peacefully. People who are not coming after you, like, people who have children who are in the LGBTQ community, like, who are scared now. Is my child going to be unsafe in this world? Because we have people screaming about there are two genders and that's it. There have been people questioning gender identity as long as there have been people. It's not new, okay? I think it would be a really meaningful time to just deeply look at, what is motivating each one of us personally. Like, what is it that you really want? And for me, if I love someone, I want them to be safe in this world. And I understand that the world is not safe. Um, you know, I don't think we are, in fact, I feel there aren't too many things that I feel like extremely confident about, but I feel extremely confident that if you want the world to be a more peaceful and loving place, you don't put white nationalists in power. You don't put sexual predators in power. You don't put men in power who are adjudicated. This is not what you do. But this is what has happened. This is what a lot of people decided was a good next right step. And I'm hoping that it is. Like, I've seen some people saying, like, this is the last gasp, this is like that sort of patriarchal, this beast, of that straight white man who sees his power is in jeopardy. It's, like, by 2044, if things don't change, the trajectory that we're on, white people will not be in the majority in this country anymore. And I do think there are a significant number of straight white men in power who are fighting hard to make sure that does not happen. They don't want to lose the power they've had all this time. Well, we've seen what happens when they rule the world. We're looking at it. It is not pretty. We could use a lot more compassion and tolerance and, just like some loving energy here. We could use people who are like, this is not the way to treat the planet. This is not the way to treat a tree, to suck it dry till it's nothing but a stump. This is not the way to treat our neighbors. I'm not going to enforce my views on somebody who has a whole different set of circumstances. I want to try to let people just live and exist. If we did that, I'm just going to tell you, if we just had a reset here and said, we are one human race on one planet, and we just need to share the resources and let people live, things would get a lot better for everyone. But we're nowhere close to that. We're nowhere close to that right now. I hope it's like the last gasp. I hope that what we're seeing is this ugly sort of like surge of, the patriarchy, like hanging on for dear life and trying to create the Handmaid's Tale here only to be thwarted. Like, I hope that's what's going to happen, but I really don't know. And I wouldn't want to be passing the gravy to somebody who just voted for people who don't respect women. Like, I don't want to do that. I'm going to just very openly, it's not about, you're putting politics above family or friendship. No, it's not that. It's like, if you are my friend and you love me and you care about me, then you also respect me and you respect my right to exist and you consider me equal, or you don't. And if you don't, then you're not really my friend. Like, that's not love in my book. And so when you vote for people who are openly disrespectful toward women, and you have now a president coming into power who, like, almost every guy he's nominated, and a woman too, there's sexual either convictions or credible allegations. That's just really sad. That's a message. You're sending a message. And so, that's what I've been really digging into the last few weeks. That sort of, the messaging and what it is that we're absorbing and what it is that we're, what it is that we are saying yes to and saying no to. And when I think about the kind of world that I would love to create and the kind of world that I tried to create for my own children, I think about my nanny, and the way that I felt with her and the way that I felt loved and safe and cherished. And that's certainly what I tried to create for my own children. And I did touch on one last thing that I'll touch on here as well, is that, for when my kids were little, that is really what I tried to do. And I felt like I had this roadmap in my heart of how to create an environment like that, because I knew from my nanny, like I knew, how to do that. It came naturally to me because I had experienced it. And so I did that for my children, and I felt that it wasn't something I had to think about. Like by the time I had my children, I was so ready for them. I was, it's like the honor of my entire life to be entrusted with these two unbelievable human beings, and to try to make the world safe and beautiful for them. But then at a certain point, as they got old enough, to try to explain things to them that, to teach them to whisper on the way to the beach, to teach them to think about the way things might be for their friends and how it might be different out in the world for them versus some of their friends, and how to help make some of their friends safe, things they could be, just to be awake and aware of what's happening around you and how things are for other people, and to care about that, because that's how we do. That's the best part in us, is to see someone, who maybe has a different life experience out in the world, and to care. We have mirror neurons, we're wired for empathy, but you can really override a lot of that stuff if that is what you decide to do. You can allow yourself to become really hard, and I really don't advise it. It doesn't feel good. The bottom line is we're all going to get about whatever, if we're lucky, if we're super lucky, 75 to 100 years. You really want to live your life being hard and angry and hateful and, judgy, and telling other people how to live and how to love and how to pray? Like, what are you doing? Just focus on your own, inner world here, and try to make it a more peaceful, loving place. You'll feel so much better. And you'll see that your neighbor there, the house with two moms or two dads and happy kids, they're like beautiful, wonderful, well done. Anywhere that love exists, compassion exists, empathy exists, beautiful. Anywhere that violence, fear, and hatred exist, something's going wrong. And that's just what it comes down to. And if you're voting for a ticket that's full of violence, hatred, and fear, something's going wrong. So, maybe just think about like the stories that you've absorbed and the stories that you're telling yourself. And if you are someone who's like, oh, what does someone mean if they say your body might, come on now, you know what it means. Like, just really take a look at this stuff and see if you can work out what has happened inside of you that you feel this desire to, take a club and bash other people over the head, and ask yourself if that's who you want to be, because time's passing. We don't have time to waste. So I'm really thankful for a community that's willing to have these conversations. And I know sometimes they're challenging or confrontational, especially if you are someone who grew up reading a lot of this stuff. I'm not trying to like go after. I'm just trying to say, hey, take a look at some of the messages underneath these stories that you might not have really thought to examine in this way, because they were just like they were in the water, right? It's good to like, I did a lot of that. Coming out of those two households, I had to do a lot of, wait a second, is my job to take care of everyone else at my own expense? Is that what I'm supposed to do? Is it really not okay for me to express anger? Do I have to go down the aisle with the pink and sparkly? Am I not like allowed to make noise and run, take up space in this world and, express myself? Like, I had to really do a lot of that, bringing these stories into the light and kind of deciding this stuff is stuff I was taught. It doesn't mean I have to accept it as true. And I think that it would be good for everyone to do that. I really do. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it was a helpful conversation. I, of all the things that I'm grateful for in my life, it's people more than anything else. When it comes down to it, that has always been clear to me. Like, that's the gold here, is the connection that we get to have with other people and loving other people and caring about other people. That's like the best way to live. While you're here, it really is. And anytime you feel like envy or like a desire to, control or take, or just to like let that be a moment to examine what's happening inside of me. Why am I feeling like I'm not enough? Or, what is the fear that's coming up for me? Or what is that, if there's envy, like what's going on? Or if there's a desire to teach someone a lesson, like what is happening? Because it's never going to feel good. You're never going to feel as good as you could if you're in that. It's just sticky and dark and not, it's not pleasant. Whereas like if you're just heart's open and you're like, oh my gosh, look at this person over there. Like they're doing things differently than I, but it's so beautiful. Look at the art they're creating. Look at the things that they're saying. Like I love this. Feels so good, to be open and giving and loving. So, okay. I hope that was helpful. I am incredibly grateful for you. And I hope you can feel that. I really do. I hope you can feel how much joy I get just in connecting with people. Even if we have like different ideas, some people in the comments were like, I loved the giving tree. It's, okay. Like let's talk about it. Like I'm cool. I like to have conversations. I don't need people to agree. The only place where I draw that line is if your opinions or beliefs are causing harm to someone else, especially someone who has less power than you. In the scheme of things, then I have a problem, and I'll talk to you about it. but yeah, all right. I love you, and I hope that I hope you feel that you have people in your life who want you to be safe and want the world to feel beautiful for you. I hope you have that. I certainly want that. So I love you, and I'll talk to you soon.